So, are there native religions in India? No, insofar as a Protestant category was strategically applied in a variety of colonial contexts. No, clearly no. That theoretical answer, thanks to the work of so many people here, sitting at this table as well as in our larger group, that answer can be brief and straightforward. I think the historical answer is more difficult than the simple no, and more intriguing than the simple no. And other modes of theoretical formulation, once we have decided on the simple no, also come up as a challenge. However, insofar as Protestant categories were strategically applied in a variety of colonial contexts, the answer would be no. Many of us, as I've noticed the conversation evolve over the last few days, have almost begun to think about it as an assumption that we can't really think and use the term in a way that's at all intellectually comfortable. I haven't heard anyone yet say that we can and should use the term in a way that is intellectually comfortable, but perhaps that will continue. That may happen, but I'm not sure it will. One of the interesting things that have emerged from that straightforward answer no is some very interesting new historical work. I'm thinking particularly of Professor Masahiko's wonderful paper this morning looking at going through what I now understand from my colleague from Czechoslovakia, I don't know where, Martin, over there, to be extremely difficult texts on Chaitanya, looking at ideas about Dharma and Islam in two very difficult Gaudiya Vaishnava texts, and thinking again about what the representation of Islam is in those texts. It's a wonderful, difficult piece of work. It took him, I'm sure, a really long time to do. And it's based on that very question and that very simple answer. Another example was Professor Gelder's work on the earliest European images. We all have received in the last 10 or 15 years ideas about the colonial formation of religion, enough already, been there, done that, as they say in American slang. But what are the earliest European images that we have? As far as I know, this is tremendously important work that involves an intimate knowledge of several European languages, again, incredibly painstaking. And here's a great example of the kind of work that the simple answer no to this question can produce. I also was inspired by so many comments, I'm just naming a few, but Professor Odi's response to Akhil this morning and to incorporating Yakov's comments about ways of looking at responses to missions and a set of very interesting texts that involve translation dictionaries that missionaries used to use with preachers, Indian preachers. We are discovering, let me just put it straightforwardly, a new set of corpuses to look at that we never even thought about looking at before. In other words, one of the things that's happening, if the answer is straightforwardly no, is we are redefining what constitutes the archive. And the examples I just gave are good ways of thinking about that. Also, thinking about the straightforward answer no, there are new possibilities that I think have only really just barely been touched on. If, in fact, this is the case, then ancient India needs to be entirely redone. And it's embarrassing because we're always slow on the uptake and we always are bounded by a lack of evidence, and archaeological and textual study never go hand in hand even though we try and so on. But to take two obvious examples, the word religion, we've all commented, could be the same operation that Balu and others have performed on the word religion could easily be performed on many, many other words. Ramala Thapar made a wonderful suggestion at the Mahabharata conference in London that Rajya, why is it translated as kingdom? What if you translated it as something else? It would make early Indian society look completely different. So that would be one example of what needs to be done with early India. Second is Sharma's work on the Shudra in early India, given the new ways of thinking about this, as well as the presence of subaltern studies, which have been an interesting interlocutor in this conference as well. It needs to be entirely rewritten and should be updated in the light of this new thinking. So those are the kinds of two very specific examples on ancient India, and I know this august audience could think of many more. The third point under number one is that more theoretical work, I think, also needs to be done. I want to echo a colleague whose name I don't remember, but who I hope is here, when he said yesterday that the understanding of Western and Christian and biblical absolutely need to be rethought as we move forward. I feel that in our conversations to date, we still tend to use those analytical categories with a kind of carelessness that we would be very upset with ourselves if we used it in a Hindu, a Buddhist, or Jain context. And this is a very important thing that, even though I want to say it, actually doing it is another story. Jim Fitzgerald's work, I understand both his new work as well as his old work, reminds us of this over and over again. The answer, yes, has to do with our institutional lives. And I was so grateful for the panel last night, because we saw addressed the various challenges within the social communities in India that try to take up the study of religions more broadly. I want to make a note of a deep irony that I saw in the structure of the conference, which is that even though this panel existed, many of the assumptions that Fitzgerald, McCutcheon, Balagangadharan, and others have worked with were somewhat at odds with the assumptions that were in the panel about creating the study of religion. Or at least say there were tensions that I think needed to be explored more than they were. We did begin to think and talk again about religion as an absolute category in that panel. We had to, because in our institutional context, I have to say, because I've done this for 7 years as chair of a department, religions, if you want a department of religion, or even in many cases for religion to be taken seriously, sometimes you have to act as if it's given in order to get money. It's very straightforward in a certain way. If we say that there is no such thing as religion, or some variation of that in India, we usually don't persuade deans to give us money for the study of religion. It's a very straightforward thing that follows. The deconstructing kinds of arguments don't fly institutionally. I've tried them, and they tend not to work. But I think we can make more sophisticated versions of the deconstructionist argument that actually allies itself as cultural critic, as McCutcheon has talked about, to the humanistic discourses about religion in a very important way. Occasionally, we may have an extremely enlightened dean who gets it, understands that we could create a religion department around religions not existing. But most deans are not that enlightened. And so we're in a very interesting catch-22, and I think we need to rethink the sophisticatedness of our arguments so that we can be faithful to our intellectual agenda without going back to saying the study of Hinduism doesn't exist at such and such university or such college, let's make it happen so that we can criticize it, right? Dean is not going to get that despite our best attempts. So that's, I think, that institutional reality is incredibly important. Related to that is that, in my view, any theory of religions, especially the kinds of very compelling ideas that we've seen, history of religions and history of the word and its implied theoretical implications, has to, and is my view, incomplete without a theory of the university and what the university can and should do within and in relationship to communities in the 21st century. This is a very important idea because I'm not talking about universities being sympathetic to religious communities at all. I'm talking about rules of engagement that need to be clear, and that could be a relationship of permanent critique or even permanent hostility. But those rules of engagement are absolutely new 21st century realities. Many people speak no longer of the ivory tower, but of the ivory fence. And what does that look like vis-a-vis our institutional reality of the study of religion?